Welcome to the Quantum City Initiative, a show about the most important stories, ideas at the intersection of AI, cities, real estate, and the leaders shaping the future of how and where we live and work. Do you save and reinvigorate cities, or are you building new ones?
What is most critical for cities in the future with this sort of AI factory race to work? All right. F29, the QCI show. Chase, we're back. We dusted the rust off a little bit last week, but the show is booming, man. April numbers are up and to the right. Things are good. How you doing today?
Well, they're always to the right, so I'm glad they're up.
They are always to the right. Up or down, they do go right. Action-packed show today. Ton of news this week. Ton of funny stuff. A lot of good memes.
We got memes? I didn't even...
We got some memes. One more bit of news is super serious, but super hilarious.
Okay.
So we got to.
That's a very strange combination. I can't wait. I have not read the one more bit of news.
We got to thread the needle a little bit. Okay, so listen, on this show, we talk a lot about, obviously we talk a lot about AI. We talk a lot about commercial real estate. We talk a lot about sort of the Quantum City Index. This week, there's just an insane amount of news. So we're really going to run through earnings, and we're going to run through a lot of the news that happened this past week, as opposed to going through a ranking of a specific city. And we've yet to hear back from either the mayor or the governor of Massachusetts on our invites that we gave them out last week. But let's jump right in, because we're going to obviously hit over an hour. So 6 months ago, we had a show. We talked about artificial intelligence will gut office demand. Artificial intelligence is going to replace everybody. Artificial intelligence is going to destroy the offices. It's the final boss for commercial real estate. Well, this week, the biggest publicly traded urban office REIT in America stood up on its earnings call, said the exact opposite. Owen Thomas, CEO of BXP, love BXP, by the way. There's no question that AI has been and continues to be enormously beneficial to BXP's leasing activity. Okay, so is it just San Francisco? No, but San Francisco does play a lot into this. In SF, AI and tech leasing went from 50% of demand at the start of 24 to 57% to nearly 80% in Q1 of this year. 360 Park Avenue hit 95%. It's leased on a single AI tenant expansion. Obviously, the amount of money going into CapEx, the amount of revenue being printed is just insane. So we talked a lot about the bubble. You make your little noise there about that. AI was going to crater the office. The bull case is that it just continues to pay the rent. What's your take?
I think there's two kind of threads to pull apart here. First is a trend throughout our careers, and for anyone who's listened to a bunch of the episodes or remembers our last company, we had a thesis, and plenty of smart people before us had covered this, but innovation does and has, and seemingly, so long as we all stay human, always cluster, right? And so I think the fallacy that Zoom and kind of digital technologies were going to ultimately push us apart, and we're going to have all these remote first companies, I think is it's proving out that kind of the human nature of clustering and innovation going hand in hand. It doesn't really matter what the underlying tech trend is, right? So when you think about AI, everyone is talking about how AI is going to displace workers. It is going to displace and is displacing specific tasks within, I think Mark Andreessen described a job as a bundle of tasks. It is displacing those tasks just like the calculator displaced doing addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, whatever, with a pencil and paper. The people who are at the forefront of innovation always tend to cluster around one another. AI didn't create itself, people created AI. So I think this clustering is following millennia of the same trend. is good to see. The thing we always talk about is how do you get that kind of proliferation more broadly, more quickly, because the economic gains of the clustering tend to get concentrated, and then proliferation. We saw this in cloud and SaaS and the internet. You saw it in industrial revolution, all this stuff. It's a very good thing. You just want it to spread to more people more quickly. So that's one. And then I think the second thread in this that's really interesting is when we talk about AI driving leasing, people tend to still think of technology and AI within it as a vertical, and it's not. AI is very much a horizontal. What I mean by that is people who work in technology, there are people who do technology in all types of work. So there's going to be more people in-house in law firms, manufacturing firms, consumer goods companies. You think of the big sectors of the economy, and ultimately think of any job today where you're not interfacing with some form of software, right? And I think what AI is going to do, and you see this in the software job numbers, they've actually gone up. The more people are hiring for people, let's say, in the realm of software. AI is in almost every one of those job descriptions. But I think we're going to see continue, if you will, of technology within these vertical industries.
Even Disney came out that their park workers have to hit a certain amount. I don't know if it's token spend. Hopefully it's not token spend.
Wait, park workers?
They're looking at their Claude leaderboard. They're literally looking at it and saying, listen,
when is Mickey hitting Claude? Like
all the time when they're in those tunnels, man.
That makes no sense to me, but I love it. Like that guy's in that suit just banging away on Claude. Like, hey, how should I interact with this family that's walking up to me?
Yeah, I think, yeah, maybe. But listen, the fact is that it's proliferating and it's absolutely everywhere. Now, we talked about the sort of our Luddite fallacy episode, and you obviously really nailed this one, which was F25 back in February, where the market was absolutely hammered. CBRE traded down, JLL traded down, BXP, Vorado, Newmark, everybody bled on this AI scare, right? And we're 2 months later, and we're going to get to earnings in a little bit, but where do you see, I guess, us on the maturity graph? Are we still in the incredible early innings of what is this AI impact on leasing, on commercial real estate, on industrial, on data centers, on all of that? And this sort of February episode we had where the market was absolutely hammered, was that just another little blip and we're trending up and we're going to continue to go up and to the right? What's your take on that?
I think when you look at kind of end user adoption, I think we're still very early in terms of end user adoption of AI. I think you look at kind of the user numbers from ChatGPT or Google's AI products, Grok, whatever. And I think a lot of people very quickly adopted the chat AI apps as their supplemental search, right? So I think a lot of people think, oh, it's proliferated really quickly, but that is such a tiny speck of AI. And when you look at kind of commercial adoption and, you know, why Anthropic is having their moment right now, they nailed the types of businesses and the types of work that they were set up the best to be the business early adopters, which are people that work in software, right? That I think from a strategic perspective, it's a very important kind of strategic layer to win, because at the end of the day, when you're using AI, it's all code, right? So if you're winning at the code use case, even if you're not necessarily generating code with AI, but you're generating a PDF, that natural language prompt is generating code that generates the PDF, right? So they're leading in what I think is a very strategic, critical piece of the layer that is going to unlock a lot of the other B2B use cases. So that's important. But when you think about how this is going to overwhelmingly, rewrite, let's say, business processes. You were just showing me a business process that you had automated before we started this that has to do with live events, right? I don't even think we've seen the game fully start. I think across, let's call it non-software business processes of making software.
Do
I
you
think it's moving
think,
really fast, and back half of 26, 27, there's going to be new companies that we haven't heard of that are the darlings that are figuring out these other corners of the economy that come out of nowhere very quickly and start to advance these other kind of pieces of business being AI driven?
I agree, we're in the early innings of, I guess, the consumer adoption or perhaps company adoption. There's some folks that are certainly farther ahead than others. Claude still hallucinates on me. I got in a fight with it last night because I called it out for just making up data, and it admitted that it took shortcuts and was lazy. So the scale's not there. But what about the investment in infrastructure and the amount of CapEx going into these data centers? Is that matched to the token usage? Or do you think we're over engineered at the current rate, knowing that the consumer adoption or company adoption will catch up, right? Because there's billions and trillions of dollars going into these data centers all over, and data centers are being shut down by public forums. It feels like maybe that investment is ahead of maybe the adoption you were just talking about.
I don't know if it's ahead. I think, again, it's funny how AI and office there are some parallels, right? So there's two kind of threads here. There's the demand thread where it's moving at a different clip, and there's the capital and the capital markets thread, right? So when you look at AI, a lot of the demand signals suggest the rumors on Anthropic and their new Mythos model, which is supposed to be a huge improvement to the current ones. The rumor was they didn't release it not because they were scared of how good it was. It was because they didn't think they had the compute to back it up.
Yeah.
And then, you get mixed signals on, say, OpenAI, where they're, from a capital perspective, they might be getting out over their skis, but the word is still that they don't have enough compute. And I think we talked about this last week, where on the capital piece, there's just certain complexity with regards to how a data center gets underwritten, right? The lenders on it, and there are rules for the banks on how much exposure they can have to one company. So you saw with, I think it was an OpenAI data center project, or maybe it was Oracle for OpenAI, where JP Morgan technically had too much exposure to Oracle, right? So I think there's going to be some, when you zoom in to the short and medium term, I think there's going to be some dislocation of, how the capital markets ultimately serve this and maybe get burnt a little bit here or there, take some hits. But I think if you zoom out, I don't think there's any path in the near term where I'm seeing obviously token usage go down. I think the question will be obviously the kind of efficiency. We have always proven we can drive more efficiency up in the stack as the non-hardware layer gets smarter about using compute and all that stuff, which is going to happen. But even still, with some efficiency gains, I think we're looking at probably some pretty durable CapEx build out for this type of compute.
Yeah, and so that's a perfect transition. So let's talk impact on the CapEx. So let's go to earnings for a bit. So Q1 earnings season mostly in the books. We've been talking about the bull case. We kicked off the show with BXP. Let's run through some numbers on office REITs, just a couple select office REITs, brokerage, and some of the big tech. Weave in your thoughts as we go. So BXP, the lead, Q1 leasing numbers, 1.1 million square feet, 68 transactions. Central Business District occupancy 90%. Owen Thomas, like we talked about, and Doug Lind on AI as the demand driver. Stock shed a little bit. I'm not worried about that. SL Green, Q1 2026, leasing was a record. 51 office leases, just under 1 million square feet in Manhattan. Average rent over $100, over $105 a foot. Top deals, Clay, AI, pretty good. Harvey, AI, okay. They had a net loss, but they beat estimates as well. Same theme echoed across Vornado, Cousins, Hirewoods, Kilroy, all the same. Trophy and AI anchored and are doing incredibly well. B and C still distressed. Now, if you run the mentions of AI in all of the earnings was at an absolute record and high. And that's, I guess, the whole reason for why we kicked this off is that every single one of these companies are at the top, right? We've talked about the experience gap, Trophy, and A plus at the top, but now we're talking about Trophy, A plus, AI at the top, and every single one of them are crediting AI. And these are commercial. This isn't even in the industrial side. This is really just the commercial side. They're absolutely smashing it out to record numbers.
Yeah, and I think you've got this in submarkets of key markets that have the AI clustering that we talked about, which is why it's important we talked about what Ryan Durkin is doing with the Boston AI Coalition. The top priority of every local government should be economic development efforts around how AI will apply to their core industries. I think you're seeing a lot of, I would say, opportunism by politicians to push back on AI. And I think that's incredibly short-sighted. And then I think even the president of Boston Properties, I think, wouldn't guarantee that this holds for 4 to 5 quarters. I don't think that's signaling anything because who would predict 4 to 5 quarters of this type of growth? But this is what's definitely proving out what we talked about, which is when you make things more efficient, oftentimes you can see demand for labor actually go up rather than go down. And that ties to obviously different ways of working, but work still needs to get done. So if we can leverage the efficiency gains to make things more cost effective, ultimately you can expand demand for more products and services, and you're going to need more people working on said products and services. So letting the free market do its thing is a good thing. And what I do think, and I'll counter because I think there's a really interesting story in this data where New York and San Francisco are probably the cities that are in the news the most. Yeah, I don't know why the balloons are coming up. It's stupid Apple. But they're in the news the most for, what I think they're getting a lot of flack for really bad anti-business policy. And typically I tend to agree with things that are
You're talking about the political angle.
Yes. But these numbers would suggest that people are just powering through. So when there's a couple of ways to read it, which is one being the most, I would say, friendly to the politicians. Is the policy that bad? I don't know. Another way to maybe read it is local government is impactful as maybe it gets credit for, but everybody talks about the San Francisco and New York exodus and brain drain, but these numbers would suggest that has not hit yet.
That's interesting. I got to double click on that because you hear about all the folks. We listen to All of those guys, or most of those guys, have moved out of California. We talked about what Mom Downey is doing in New York. A couple of the big names, hedge fund folks are either threatening to pull out or move out of New York. We saw those exodus maybe down to Florida and Austin, Texas. But like you just said, The numbers in Q1 would say the exact opposite story, that people are not fleeing these two cities despite the local government or change in local government. That's it. It's very interesting. We're going to go deeper there.
Yeah. And look, I think a lot of it is centered on the billionaire class.
Right.
And the narrative is that billionaires leave and it's going to
Right.
move down to rich, not necessarily ultra wealthy and middle class. We'll have to see.
Let's move to brokerage and services. CBRE. We'll talk a little bit about CBRE in the next section too. Q1 revenue, 10.5 billion, smashed the 9.5 billion expectation. Net income nearly doubled year over year. Their BOE segment, which we'll do a deep dive on next, their building operations and experience revenue grew about 20%. Management called it one of the best starts to the year. Critical infrastructure services. So this is the data center business alone, printed 950 million revenue in Q1, which is obviously massive. And that's their data center business, at CBRE's brokerage data center business, which is insane. That number was nothing. It was $0 5 years ago. That is insane. Transactional business grew. CBRE raised its full earnings per share guidance. JLL revenue for the quarter was 6.4 billion, adjusted EBITDA up 22%, earnings per share up 0.56%. They beat their forecast. Advisory revenues up 17%. Newmark and Cushman Wakefield haven't reported yet. Episode 25, again, we talked about the AI panic. I remember getting on the show and just seeing red all over the board. JLL, Newmark, CBRE, everybody got absolutely murdered. And now look at these earnings numbers come back in Q1. Wow.
I mean, when you look at that 950 million in one quarter for CB, not long ago, that number was basically zero in data. It's crazy. It's crazy. So this ties directly to the advice for local economic development. Grab it and work it in, embrace it. Like, this narrative of fear mongering is ultimately not good for people.
But also, this goes to your point about this notion, and I don't know if this is the point you were making. This is the point that you were making in my head, is this, like, the idea of, well, historically was a tech company, right? Ooh, tech companies this and tech companies that. Commercial real estate, obviously, way back when, wouldn't give the time and effort to startups. Then we saw that massive growth, right? .com and so on. And now we're in this AI age. But again, this is why these two worlds are so incredibly important. It's why we talk about this constantly on the show, the intersection of AI, tech, and commercial real estate. Because, and again, we've talked over the past year or 8 months of doing the show, is commercial real estate dead? Are we coming back? What's happening to cities? We're seeing the impact of the technological sort of evolution with AI right in front of us in commercial real estate. And it's incredibly fun to watch.
I think we'll get a lot of the story when some of the smaller firms, Cushman, Newmark, I think Cushman reports maybe May 7th.
Next week.
And I think it will be telling to see if there's a bifurcation and the K curve between the bigs, which CB is in a class of its own, JLL number 2, they're the big ones to scale, where Cushman, Newmark, and some of the long tail is netting out. When in markets like these, the compounding large platforms, if they have the right strategy, tend to win bigger.
Love it. Big tech. We won't talk a ton about big tech earnings. It's really just all about their CapEx spend. Guess what? AI.
I did see Zuckerberg had an interesting town hall, because they're smashing it from a performance perspective, but the street didn't like his CapEx investment.
Yeah, everybody's scared. But again, they didn't like, well, this was a boss job on his part. Remember when he went all in on the metaverse and all that? That's right.
If I'm being honest, I remember it, but it seems so long ago, even though it wasn't. I still am not totally sure what the metaverse is. Also wild that he just renamed the company Meta. So I wonder if he's rethinking that at all.
I think it plays better than Facebook. Facebook was so 2007.
Yeah, I guess Meta, it's perfect for him because they've had a bunch of PR issues and Meta's pretty forgettable. Right. Well, probably good to just, what's the name of the company again?
Exactly. But yeah, the story there is just massive CapEx investment. And guess where that money's going? And it's just a big pile of money from all these big tech companies. And that big pile of money is going right to JLL, CBRE, BXP, and everybody else. So good for them. Commercial real estate's back and having its moment, which is fantastic. So let's go a little bit deeper on CBRE and Industrious. I know this individual we're going to talk about here. So last year, CBRE bought Industrious for $800 million. Love that. Great move. Although at the time, every Monday morning quarterback and Twitter folk called it the sort of what's happening here. Is this an overpay? Is this a WeWork bet? Really, what is it? It's expensive. It's late. Jamie Hodari obviously had other plans, has done incredibly well in his seat at CBRE, and he was the Industrious co-founder, by the way. Now he's hiring a replacement, a new CEO of Industrious, and he's going full-time into CBRE, running their new business segment called Building Operations and Experience. What's your take on this move from CB and Industrious here?
Well, Solenik, who is the CBRE CEO, is a stud. When you talk to very smart people in market, I think the general feedback on him is pretty similar to where you see some of the distinguished tech executives differing from, say, the kind of professional manager class. He makes bold bets. For a company of that size, they move really quickly. He tends to see where the puck is going very well. And to your point about the Monday morning quarterbacking, I think a lot of people were very surprised that he was making Jamie Hodari the head of, that business unit, I think, is at least 90,000, maybe more, 100,000 people. And Jamie was running, I don't know if it was the 1,000-person business, whatever. So I think some people were double taking on that decision. But I think what he saw was when you think about what the end user market was saying they needed, that was not developed within CBRE. So you need outside innovative thinking. I've spoken to Jamie a handful of times, anyone who knows him, he's obviously a very smart guy. And when an industry is radically changing, you got to figure out the famous Jim Collins, like, how do we preserve our core but stimulate progress? And the structure that they seemingly talked about on when they acquired the company was, we're going to continue to grow Industrious, but it's also this really great sandbox for how you drive transformation into the core business. And if you just look at the underlying math of the BOE performance, they're going to get, from a return perspective, the payback on that acquisition very clearly, very, very quickly, very clearly. It's a really big unit. The management piece of the business in commercial real estate, for people who aren't familiar, it's much stickier recurring revenue than, say, deal-based brokerage and things like that. So investors love predictability, and they clearly are on a tear. So price paid is looking like a phenomenal deal for CBRE.
Yeah, it was just $800 million. Now let's talk about their business unit for a bit. I want to get your opinion on CBRE. So the BOE, Building Operations and Experience, is their business segment. It unifies building operations plus workplace experience plus property management. Is CBRE are they that far ahead of the game here compared to JLL, Cushwake? Are they zigging when others are zagging? To me, listen, talking our own book here, this is what we build at H2O, is building ops plus experience plus PM sort of future. Are they seeing where the puck is going more than everybody else here? Is that where you can trace this acquisition back to? Again, markets dismissed it. They're absolutely printing money in this business unit. Or is it just that, I don't know, is Jamie Hodari just an absolute stud? Or is both true?
I think it's a couple of things. I'm not sure. It's impossible to know without being in the room if CBRE necessarily saw it first. But the only thing that matters is scoreboard. So I think a lot of people have seen this, and the difference comes down to what CEO takes bold action and moves quickly. And he took the boldest action and certainly has moved the quickest. And there are a lot of smart people that we've talked to over the last 10 years in this industry that believe, that commercial real estate's kind of structure, when you think about how people work, it's very siloed, where the people who manage the building on behalf of the owners and investors are wildly different than the people who manage the, say, customer relationship through tenant rep brokerage, which is very different than the people who do workplace facilities management on behalf of the occupier. But they're ultimately it's one total journey of the tenant customer, which we've talked a lot about on this show. And in other industries, you just have significantly more interconnected kind of operational processes across your customer's journey. And I think this is the most concrete action to say, when we think of the management of real estate, these kind of siloed teams, units, processes need to start coming together under one very clearly innovative early career leader. So kudos to them.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating to see it play out. The big green is moving, certainly on board with BOE. Love the experience angle. Love following Industrious through this. I'm curious as to what's next. I'm curious as to where this lands. And I haven't done an update, so apologies here. We're going to have to look at it. Is what's up with Yardi and WeWork, and how does that play into this? Sort of where's Yardi going? Obviously much smaller, not even in comparison to really CBRE's size and scale, but Yardi's an absolute whale as well. And they bought WeWork, so we're going to have to check in on that.
That's another great. I don't believe the Yardi CEO is still the CEO, not Yardi, but he's like the CB CEO. He's a stud. And I believe he'd handed over the reins, and I apologize if I've been getting this wrong. I believe he handed over the reins of kind of the core Yardi business. And then when they did the WeWork deal, I believe he's back like fully working on WeWork, believes it's the future. And he's a very smart guy. So they have been quiet, but if Anant is working on it, I wouldn't be surprised if we start hearing more about it in the next year or two.
Love that. Last week, we talked about energy and power. That was a big lead-in story. We talked about power being the new land. On a continuation this week, it just feels that the capital is truly unlimited in going into the power of these AI data centers, which is truly incredible. $725 billion of CapEx was printed in Q1. Microsoft alone is investing $200 billion. But Brookfield is walking away from a data center, and because of the sort of public fight in the courts. Is this the real canary in the coal mine here? There was a bet from, I forget the name of the hedge fund, I believe it was an OpenAI data scientist who opened a hedge fund, and he put all of the holdings into Bloom Energy because his bet was to follow the electricity, not the money. What's your take on the power? We've talked about the power grid here. What can we do to ensure that we don't go dark like we did for a week in the snowstorm of 2026 when the power went out? Do we have enough power, or are we going to see, and we've talked about efficiency in power, we've talked about nuclear power, we've talked about all of that. Is the next great commercial real estate investment power?
I mean, yes, it is. And I think the way to think about this from the capital allocation perspective is really simple. It's you follow the permitting map, right? The hyperscale.
That sounds super boring, by the way. But
yeah. Exactly, dude. I'm creating agents that are finding all the permitting things because you can get that data online. I'm not bored by it at all, but my wife would agree with you. But I think when you think about the hyperscaler migration path, it's follow the permitting process. And I think a lot of these, we're getting the bifurcation of, are you pro this kind of innovation trend that it is inevitable, right?
Mhm.
Let's just use the Avengers. Like, it is inevitable. the guy who is at the forefront of all of this sends satellites up into space. The Holland guys talked about this. If you can't put a data center here, he'll probably put it in space. So, and look, maybe people will be happier with that. I talked last week on, you've got like the Arizonas, the Mississippis. I think North Carolina is doing a pretty good job. You would go overseas, like Singapore has a very different model. They just decide, which is not necessarily our democratic process. And I do believe in the democratic process. So I think in the power of and here, because it shouldn't be an or situation. I think the number one, I think you need to find politicians that can balance the needs of the population with kind of the inevitability of, if you fight this, your economic durability is going to be in trouble. And then how, if you're in this business, how do you work to align the incentives for key stakeholders in the local populations, right? So I've been touting they call them the Trump accounts, but I think there needs to be a mechanism where local populations should be incentivized to share in the upside of compute. And I think that is a win-win-win for pretty much all of the stakeholders.
And so what, that ends your NIMBYism. I don't want a data center in my backyard because it's just a big, long, ugly building, despite what Daniel English is doing. Callback.
What a NIMBY you are, dude. Like, first off, we'll never put it in I've been in your backyard. They're not putting a data center.
By the way, would love a data center in my backyard.
All right.
By the way, would love to share on the economics.
Yeah.
But,
well, there you go.
So go a little bit deeper here.
Long buildings are such an eyesore to you? That disrupts your life. Well, that building.
I'm trying to be the media here. I'm trying to be the big media. So, okay. So tell me a little bit more about
how long that building is.
Tell me a little bit about what you mean. I'm trying to tee you up.
I am aware.
Slam me down. But I think that concept is interesting because, again, we're seeing this play out. We're seeing local towns and local governance shy away from these data centers. And I'm trying to explain why. We talked about this. It could pollute the water. They're ugly. They could.
But they don't pollute the water.
Okay, fine. Right. But this is what the headlines are out there.
I know.
So tell me what
I think this is as simple as the age-old saying, it's the economy, stupid, when people wonder how people vote. I do think when the free market and capitalism works, it works well for as much of the population as possible. We see in periods of great innovation that wealth disparity grows at its highest clip. And we have the mechanisms now to be smart about aligning more stakeholders. So I think this big, scary long building would be far less of a problem for people. And I think people are a lot smarter than the political class give them credit for, particularly at pursuing their own interests. And I think a lot of this could be understood by people rightfully pursue their own interests. And if it's $500, $1,000 for the average citizen to share in the upside of the compute, because mostly what they see is like Sam Altman is the person that's most associated publicly with AI. And there are all these rumors that he's like a sociopath.
Scam Altman?
Yeah. Elon calls him Scam Altman. A whistleblower committed suicide, but maybe didn't commit suicide. And then Ronan Farrow's writing these crazy articles about Sam. He comes off very like esoteric, robotic in his interviews. So he's not relatable even in the least bit. And people are like, and this thing's going to take my job? Of course they're going to push back on it. That's the most obvious thing in the world. So I think, but a lot of people that even would grandstand on social media, they got a little bit of the take on that. You're going to see data centers benefit far more people and get greenlit in way more places. And the politicians will stop the fear mongering if you can align the incentives.
I think the aligning the incentives is huge. We're seeing property taxes I see it, which I don't follow it globally, but I certainly follow it in Massachusetts. And you're seeing property taxes and overrides at all local governments in town simply because of inflation. Okay. You're seeing energy costs spike, and we don't even have data centers close to us in little Duxbury.
Right.
So I completely agree with you on this incentive. What a way for these large companies, Oracle and all these folks coming into Northern Virginia or wherever it may be, some sort of suburban environment, to put their super ugly building in They can say, let's look what it's going to do to generate revenue for the town, and to generate revenue to perhaps subsidize some of the energy costs. It's not cash in your pocket, but can it generate additional revenue for the town or for the state? Come on.
For sure it can, but all I can think about is you're the opposite of Zoolander. That scene where he's like, this building needs to be at least 3 sizes bigger than this. This data center needs to be at least 1/3 the size.
I would love a good data center here. Let's let my compute faster, like Daniel English was telling us about. So anyways, I like that idea. I think there's something there.
I'm surprised though, and now I'm just completely spitballing, but I'm surprised we don't have the ability to put these things underground. I'm sure there's a reason for that, and I'm going to look into that for next week's episode.
Well, we talked about, and so the NIMBYism thing for me, I don't mind looking at the data centers, despite them being ugly. I don't want them in my ocean. That's what I don't want.
Well, yeah, I agree with that.
I don't want them swimming with
that news, but underground would seem, I wonder if that's possible. I'll come back to it.
Why not go to space though? Why underground? Beam me up, Scotty. Anyways, yeah, we got to go deeper there. All right, let's do some quick hits before we get to one more bit of news, which is what I was alluding to, which is just an incredibly fascinating story. Quick hit number one, I guess not super surprising. What was surprising here was one of his sort of off-the-cuff comments, but the Federal Reserve had held interest rates unchanged. Fine, okay. We know the sort of Iran war is happening. We know that energy prices are spiking. We know that inflation is not really in check. We're not super surprised by this. What was surprising is that despite Mr. Trump trying to obviously appoint a new Fed chair, with those hearings obviously going on, Jerome Powell said he's not leaving.
The Jordan Belfort, Wolf of Wall Street, man. I'm not going to.
I don't know what that means. I love it.
I think the bigger picture on this is, I think a lot of people on both sides, Republican and Democrat, talk about how poorly the system runs when they're not in power, and like tend to fall in Warren Buffett's camp of the system runs pretty well. Like, I'm not saying I agree or disagree with what's going on with the Fed, but I do believe that checks and balances, like I believe this on there's all sorts of scrutiny on the Supreme Court, and you typically only hear about it from each side when they win a ruling, whereas there's been a bunch of rulings against Trump by the people that he picked. So like at the end of the day, I think more about kind of system health and system resiliency. And so it's a good sign for system resiliency. And then the only other thing I would say is Warsh cleared the Senate Banking Committee the morning that Powell was kept on. So clearly there was some horse trading. It's the first time a board governor or the head stayed as a board governor since 1984, which I don't think that's very interesting. But however, the last guy who stayed on, his name was Mariner Eccles. What a name.
What a stud. All right.
Yeah.
I'm in on that. Quick hit number 2 in our backyard, because the company was founded here, Fidelity, who I did a couple stints with, or I did one stint with back in 2008. And by the way, back in 2008, we did go into the office 5 days a week. Well, they just announced they're following the footsteps of all the major banks. Everybody's back 5 days a week. They're the largest financial services employer in Boston. Their hybrid policy's over. Well, it'll be over in the fall. It is getting a lot of pushback from their employees.
Well, what's fascinating was I live right across the street from someone I think who's worked at Fidelity for 25, 30 years.
Yep.
And Abby Johnson took a very different approach to return to office than every other company. And what she did was she didn't do 1 day, Tuesday, 2 days, 3 days, and build up. She did 1 week, 5 days in the week per month. So she started to build that habit of
that
going
muscle.
So you knew once she rolled that out, it was slowly going to become 2 weeks,
right?
Then 3 weeks. So I think at the end of the day, everyone's going to try to get cute on this. They're working their way back to 5 days a week outside of, I think, probably who have made up their mind on hybrid or remote. And I just don't think there's any avoiding. You're going to get pushback.
You're going to get pushback. Totally.
Yeah.
100%. I think Listen, Fidelity's got offices obviously all over. That they do have a significant amount here in Massachusetts and in Boston. They did move a lot out of Boston to Covington, Kentucky, and New Hampshire. And they famously had that Marlborough campus where they got massive tax breaks on. The issue here I see is it's going to really jam up my commute into the city because our MBTA system stinks. And so does 93 coming into the city. That's my issue really with the announcement.
Fair.
Yeah, fine, whatever. Who cares about me? Number 2, Equity Residential and AvalonBay are reportedly in early talks to combine two large multifamily REITs in America, combined market cap roughly $50 billion. Does this matter? Yeah? Nay?
I can't imagine it won't be scrutinized by the administration, because affordability in homes is such a hot button topic, so I'm sure it will be. But 50 bill combined market cap, I think he said 185,000 units. It's a lot of homes. I tend to lean towards the free market, but I haven't heard much since, the administration had said something about keeping the big asset management groups out of buying up all the homes, which I'm very torn on that. In theory, I understand it. I don't think you want a rental type society and culture. A lot of people jump into the next rung of the ladder through their home equity as they get older. I got to look into this one a little bit more. I don't know if it's a good thing or not. I'm a little surprised that these two groups are talking.
Yeah, there's more to the story. More to the story that we don't know about. Going rogue on a segment before we get to one more bit of news. So some of the feedback we got on the show, which was surprising. One, we do have, we got a shout out. We have a strong, I guess, boomer following, which is great. Your mother-in-law said she listens to the show quite a bit. What?
I said, hey, Patty.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the folks that we work with who was just on a vacation, his parents said that they're huge fans of the show. So boomers are listening and watching us. But one of the feedback that we got, we had somebody write in, this person's new to commercial real estate, wants to get into commercial real estate, wants to know if we have any guidance or advice on how they should be leveraging AI and the AI tools in trying to further their career in the early 20s in commercial real estate. And this was specifically brokerage. Any thoughts, any takes, any advice, any guidance?
What do you have?
I haven't thought about it yet, to be honest. I just spin up the questions, man. This is what I do. I'm a moderator, dude. I get the easy job. I just spin up questions and then zone out for 20 minutes while you talk.
All right. Well, I'll give my far out take, I guess. My take would be that there's going to be someone in brokerage who they naturally gravitate towards industry focuses, but it's very like sector based. And you see this informal, I do well with the sports tech companies or whatever. I think taking it a step further and really leveraging the research component of AI is so good that if you can start to develop your own thoughts and even take it to what I would describe as a methodology on how do these companies work, and instead of being the guy or gal that is like hitting people up about touring space and all that, but really actually understanding how you can be an advisor to specific functions within a company and how they work and how space can ultimately drive productivity. I think AI can be your superpower to get smart on that. And you're going to be speaking to people probably higher up in the company than you would have otherwise, just being like, want to grab a beer.
Being an absolute student of the game on the business, completely agree with you there. I think there's so much siloed information, not just in brokerage or commercial real estate, across any organization. I think if you're young and coming up in your early 20s, going deep, being an absolute warrior with understanding the business processes, what makes it tick, then you can take that knowledge and then you can build some incredibly powerful tools and agents. And to your point, get immediately elevated and pulled up through the ranks. I think it's massive.
Is this where we're talking about feedback we've gotten on the show?
You have more?
Yeah, I had people sending me pictures of my hair last week.
What'd they say?
Hair's long. I got one vote of support and then one seemingly neutral.
And so you put a lid on today to stop the feedback?
I had to have the lid today, but that was the only feedback I got.
Unfortunately, nobody commented on my hair, which I did it up this morning.
Looks pretty good.
Did it up this morning. Got the hair dryer out. One more bit of news this week. And my God, did this just absolutely light up the internet yesterday. Today's Friday, May 1st. You're going to see this show on Tuesday, May the 5th? It's Tuesday, May the 5th? Yeah. Cinco de Mayo. Wall Street is so back. Oh my God, is it back? So the story here, my God, is Wall Street back? So the story here is that in the levered fin group at JPM, a woman executive director was accused and is being sued by a junior banker, claiming that the male junior banker was drugged, or the boss, the executive director, the female executive director, drugged him, made him his sex slave, coerced him into months of non-consensual sex, threatened his career, and even mocked his poor wife.
Oh, no.
So the JP Morgan, by the way, is launching a massive investigation. The story here, and JPM claims, is completely false. All the FinMeme accounts are absolutely all over this. Everybody, or a lot of folks, are saying they know this poor woman. This is absolute. This is a disaster because this is completely fabricated and fake. And obviously the names of them are out. I'm not going to mention any of the names, but the memes around JP Morgan and their job applications being up 700,000% since last week, specifically in the LevFin unit, the memes around Coach Rabel, who's got his own situation happening.
Has somebody sent me that and I didn't get I missed this story, so I haven't been on the
Coach Rabel's
on the internet.
Leaving the Pats and has applied to JP Morgan to go into LevFin unit.
Oh, that's messed up.
It's just absolute gold. So we do like to talk about pop culture. This took my feeds by storm. I don't certainly have an opinion either way, just putting it here for pure entertainment value.
Wow. Well, now I'm going to have to dig it. I missed that, so I'm going to have to go back and look at it.
The memes are just fantastic. Hopefully the truth gets sorted out here, and yeah, hopefully it either was or wasn't made up, but nobody gets really taken down for some fabrication here. Okay, what a show. We're 58 minutes, right at an hour. Covered obviously the earnings report, covered BXP, AI paying the rent, brokerage industry completely on fire. Talked a little bit about Jamie Hodari and what he's up to. Jamie, would love to have you on the show. If you're listening, that's who we should reach out to. Let's get him on the show. Subscribe to YouTube, hit us up, get some more feedback, talk about Chase's hair. Anything else, Chase, before we let the fine people go today?
Good show. See you next week.
Thanks for coming out.